Chapter 1. The Pressure Gauge. Pressure was her metronome. Dr. Sloane Keller sat in the narrow, pressurized cabin of the descent elevator. The metallic groan of the hydrosteel cable a soothing constant as the world dropped away. Outside the thick viewport, the black water of the North Atlantic vanished, replaced by the violent orange glow of the geothermal shaft, a mile deep beneath the Icelandic fault line. Sloane was meticulous. Every instrument panel was triple-checked. Every vial in her medical kit counted. She didn't rely on GaeaCore's standard safety protocols. She relied on physics, biochemistry, and most importantly, her schedule. Her gloved index finger tapped the interface pad, bringing up a complex thermal equation that governed the integrity of the drill casing she was about to enter. As the temperature outside hit 280 degrees Fahrenheit, Sloane's internal temperature had already climbed a perilous 2 degrees. The heat didn't bother her, not yet. What concerned her was the clock. She had exactly 194 minutes before the environmental stress, the heat, the lack of breathable air, the crushing hydrostatic pressure would force the change. It was a precise, calculated margin. Sloane viewed her lycanthropy not as a curse, but as an advanced biological tool. The Lycan-Shell, and she was the only one authorized to deploy it. In the high-pressure, superheated void where she worked, only the Lycan-Shell could survive long enough to retrieve data or perform emergency high-risk repairs. Report Keller. How are the differentials looking? The voice of Dr. Silas Kress crackled through the coms. Kress, GaeaCore's director of biometrics, was the reason she earned 7 figures and the reason she was never entirely safe. Stable, Dr. Kress. Entering target zone Delta-9 in T-6 minutes. I'm starting preliminary diagnostics now, as planned. Sloane kept her voice level, suppressing the slight tremor in her hand as she administered a prophylactic antispasmodic injection. This small action was her most important defense. It bought her an extra 30 minutes of control when the inevitable shift began. Cancel that, Keller. Abort diagnostics. Sloane paused, her finger hovering over the interface. I beg your pardon, sir. Delta-9 is unstable. Ignoring the diagnostics could lead to a catastrophic collapse before I even touch the pipe. Change of orders. Emergency reroute required. A drill head, a non-standard GaeaCore prototype, has been isolated in a collapsed section of the adjacent shaft. Zeta, we need you to secure the prototype immediately. Forget the pipe repairs. A prickle of ice ran down Sloane's spine, cutting through the humid heat of the cabin. Zeta 12. That shaft had been written off as a complete loss weeks ago. A non-standard prototype was corporate code for biological asset. Zeta 12 is outside my mission parameters, Dr. Kress. The structural integrity is 0. Accessing it at this pressure requires specialized reinforcement I don't have. Sloane was fishing for an excuse. An anchor. Kress's voice hardened, losing its synthetic smoothness. Your contract allows for operational flexibility, Dr. This prototype contains proprietary data that could cost GaeaCore billions if it falls into a rival's hands. Your pay reflects the severity of this risk. We trust your unique abilities to handle this. The word unique hung in the air, a razor-thin threat. Kress never wasted words. He wasn't worried about rivals. He was worried about her. He knew she could survive the impossible environment, and he knew the forced shift would eliminate her ability to transmit mission details. This wasn't a salvage mission, this was a trap. Sloane looked down at her hands, the skin already stretched taut beneath the surface pressure. She was rapidly losing time and control. She could refuse, but Kress would simply isolate the entire elevator system, sealing her in for an involuntary shift in collection. She closed her eyes, took one deep breath of the canned oxygen, and accepted the parameters of the ambush. Reroute accepted, Dr. Kress. Zeta 12 confirmed. Estimated time of arrival, T-minutes for minutes. Excellent, Doctor. Good luck. The comms clicked off, leaving Sloane in the terrifying silence of the deep. She pulled her specialized repair kit closer. It held the cutting tools for the job, and the silver-tipped tranquilizers for the animal she would soon become. She knew she was heading toward a crisis designed to force her ultimate weakness, but Kress had underestimated her resolve. She was the weapon, not the target. and if he wanted a wolf, he was about to get a hurricane. Chapter 2. The Anomaly. The entry chamber to Zeta 12 was less a tunnel and more a geothermal abscess, swollen with superheated steam and mineral debris. Sloane killed the lights on the elevator chassis, relying on the narrow beam of her helmet lamp. The air in her suit was recycled, thick with the smell of scorched earth and her own rising adrenaline. This was no place for delicate work. The environment was actively trying to crush itself. She disengaged the cable and secured a temporary seismic dampener to the frame. The dampener was a complex piece of tech, requiring a stable, fine motor connection, the kind of work the Lycan-Shell was incapable of. She was running on borrowed time, the clock's digits already blurring in the corner of her vision. The pressure inside the cabin was now 1,800 psi, squeezing her suit and forcing her muscles to labor, just to draw a breath. She felt the telltale symptom she hated most, the deep, muscular tremor starting in her legs, a biological alarm signaling that her body was preparing the mass required for the shift. Sloane ignored it. She needed to see the prototype. She shimmied through a narrow gap, clearing jagged bits of casing. The target came into view, a strange obsidian black device embedded in the rubble. It wasn't a standard GaeaCore drill head. It was conical, ringed with microscopic, porous inlets, and humming with a sickly green internal light. It looked less like something that punched through rock, and more like something that inhaled life. Found the anomaly, Sloane murmured into the dead cums, knowing Kress was listening but unwilling to reveal her internal panic. She pulled out her universal diagnostic scanner, attaching it to the device's external chassis. The data feed that flooded her visor was instantaneous and sickening. The device wasn't drilling, it was filtering. It was a molecular collector designed to rapidly metabolize and store organic matter, and then, horrifyingly, to disperse a modified, unstable biological agent. It was the shiftcaster. Kress didn't just want her data. He wanted her essence, packaged as a weapon. A cold, analytical part of her mind, the part that was Dr. Sloane Keller, registered the sheer complexity of the betrayal. He had engineered this specific, lethal environment to ensure a forced shift, maximizing the viral load he could collect while minimizing her chance to fight back. She was cornered suddenly. The floor beneath her bucked. A massive, crystalline pillar of rock, cracked by the heat, sheared away from the ceiling and crashed beside her. The sound was deafening, even through her helmet. The subsequent seismic spike slammed the cabin against the wall. The tremors were too much. Her human form had reached its breaking point. The biological alarm became a siren. Her joints locked, her vertebrae stretched, and the skin across her chest ripped open the internal seams of her suit. The Lycan-Shell was coming, fast and violently. Sloane threw the diagnostic scanner into a nearby crevice, determined that Kress wouldn't get the data she'd just collected. She stumbled backward, fighting the pain and the involuntary roar that was building in her throat. She had failed to destroy the prototype as a human. Now, the wolf would have to clean up the doctor's mess. Chapter 3. The Lycan-Shell Deployment. The sound of the shift began not as a crack, but as a deep, resonating thrum, the sound of skeletal architecture being violently rearranged. Sloane dropped the silver-tipped tranquilizers, her fingers seizing up as the transformation surged past the point of no return. Her suit, hydrostatically sealed and designed to withstand thousands of pounds of pressure, was now a fragile membrane ripping under the strain of internal expansion. The heavy canvas and reinforced polymers shredded like tissue paper. The pain was total, obliterating all thought, all strategy. It was a million needles of molten rock, driving through every joint, every tendon snapping and refusing into massive load-bearing structures. She screamed, but the sound was trapped, muffled by the sheer density of her changing throat, emerging only as a deep, guttural growl that belonged to the geothermal caverns, not a woman. In seconds, where Dr. Sloane Keller stood, a colossal, pressure-forged predator, now crouched. The Lycan-Shell was deployed. It was 8 feet of coiled jet-black fury. Its fur was not soft. It was thick, rigid, and densely matted, resembling cooled basalt, an absolute shield against the 300-degree heat and crushing sigh. Its eyes, now glowing yellow thermal lenses, immediately registered the threat in the room, not just the prototype, but the environment itself. The creature's first instinct was pure, instinctual command. Destroy the source of pain and confinement. Its massive paws, reinforced with hardened keratin and razor-sharp claws, slammed down, anchoring it against the violently shaking floor. The prototype the ship. The wolf charged it, saw the humming, sickly green device, and translated it instantly as enemy. But a faint, desperate echo of Sloane's mind fought through the bloodlust. Wait, do not obliterate it. We need the data, we need proof. The wolf hesitated, its muzzle inches from the prototype. The internal conflict was a battle of will against biology. The creature wanted to tear the shiftcaster to shreds. Sloane forced the creature to regard it as fragile, requiring delicacy. This agonizing restraint was her ultimate defense against Kress. Instead of destroying the device, the Lycan-Shell turned its attention to the collapsing shaft. With a howl of frustration, the wolf's protest against its human puppeteer it planted its feet and used its supernatural strength to push against the falling rock. The crunch of rock against bone, the roar of escaping steam, the smell of burnt metal, all of it faded as the Lycan-Shell, guided by a single thought of survival, stabilized the collapsing tunnel and secured the black, glowing prototype beneath a heavy piece of drill rigging. The immediate crisis was averted, but Sloane's control was shattered. She had been forced to deploy, and Kress knew it. Her mission was now simple: live long enough to make him regret it. Chapter 4. Kress's blueprint. The reversion from the Lycan-Shell was always worse than the shift itself. It wasn't the sudden, explosive pain of growth, but the agonizing retreat. Sloane lay curled on the deck plating, naked and shivering, covered in a sticky film of biological residue and spent steam. The residual strength of the shell kept her conscious, even as every nerve ending screamed in protest. Her human body felt impossibly heavy, fragile, and utterly exposed. The only sound was the distant groan of the damaged shaft and the frantic thump-thump of her own heart. She took a moment, forcing her mind to overcome the biological shutdown. Focus, prove the trap. With a monumental effort, she crawled to the crevice where she had hidden her diagnostic scanner. Her hands trembled, but her professional training clicked into gear. She retrieved her emergency, low-power data pad from a wrist pocket, the one Kress didn't know about, and quickly linked it to the prototype's main processing core. She had to bypass 3 layers of proprietary encryption. But Kress's codes, while complex, were predictable. Sloane was the one who taught him the logic. The logs spilled across her screen, painting a gruesome picture. The shiftcaster prototype was functional, designed to harvest and stabilize the Lycan-Shell's unique viral markers. But the terrifying detail was in the output metrics. It was intended to create an aerosolized, unstable Lycan agent designed to force mass transformations in genetically compatible subjects, workers, mercenaries, anyone GaeaCore deemed expendable. Kress hadn't just lured her into a trap to collect her DNA. He was trying to build an army of her. Stripped of her control, her shell would become their shackle. But then she found the final log entry, stamped 30 seconds before the comms cut off. It wasn't a log. It was a command sequence. A self-destruct sequence targeting her customized pressure suit's core reactor. The command was time-delayed, set to detonate the moment she successfully destroyed the shiftcaster and prepared for extraction. Kress wasn't planning for her capture. He was planning for her vaporized disappearance, ensuring 0 evidence remained. "He wanted me gone," Sloane whispered, the realization hitting her with the cold clarity of a deep ocean current. It was a termination order disguised as an extraction mission. The physical pain of the shift retreated, replaced by a searing, focused anger. Sloane was not just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting to prevent GaeaCore from mass-producing her trauma. She now had the blueprint of Kress's weapon, and she knew exactly what she had to do next. Make sure Kress's system, and his career, imploded long before his seismic charges destroyed the shaft. Her tools were not just for repair, they were for war. Chapter 5. Sabotage Protocol. The tremor subsided into a low, perpetual rattle, but the danger was just beginning. Sloane, dressed only in the torn remnants of her undersuit, worked quickly. She was operating on pure muscle memory and adrenaline. treating her body like a badly damaged machine that had to function a few hours longer. She gathered her materials to high-frequency pressure regulators, torn from the shattered remains of her suit's hydraulic system, a canister of highly volatile crystal suspension drill coolant, and the core processing unit of a failed comms relay. Her goal was a seismic data disruptor accrued, kinetic EMP that wouldn't just cut the data flow, but permanently corrupt the highly sensitive biometric markers Kress had stolen from her suit's logs. Destroying the digital evidence was as crucial as destroying the physical weapon. Sloane soldered the components with a field torch, the bright flare illuminating the intricate, panicked movements of her hands. The disruptor was a ticking bomb. If it activated prematurely, the resulting localized spike would overload the air filtration system and effectively cook her alive. She armed it with a 3-minute timer, giving her a razor-thin margin for error. The next challenge was placement. Kress's conduit, the fiber optic spine carrying all drill data, including his stolen samples, ran through an adjacent maintenance shaft notorious for its active monitoring. Sloane had designed those sensors. She knew their blind spots, and she knew Kress relied on passive, continuous monitoring, assuming no human would ever be deep enough to manually interfere. But a human wasn't going. Still in human form, she began to move, navigating the narrow, heat-blasted tunnels. She didn't rely on sight or her remaining flashlights. She activated her Lycan-Sense, a muted form of the wolf's sensory array that she could engage without transforming. It allowed her to feel the micro-vibrations in the rock, the subtle hum of current traveling along the wires, and the faint, high-pitched whine of GaeaCore's remote surveillance drones patrolling the junction ahead. A drone, sleek and silent, zipped past the mouth of the tunnel 10 meters away. Sloane froze, pressing her body flat against the cooling basalt. The wolf sense confirmed what the sensors couldn't. The drone carried a low-frequency scanner, looking for thermal spikes. She waited until the seismic rattle briefly masked the heat signature of her own sensor, then slipped across the opening. She reached the massive, humming data conduit. It was a pressurized tube, half a meter wide, and dangerously hot. She braced the disruptor against the junction panel, securing it with magnetic clamps. Her timer showed 20 seconds remaining. Sloane punched the activation code. A small red light blinked rapidly on the casing, counting down the 3-minute fuse. She turned and ran, the sound of her frantic breathing drowned out by the metallic shriek of the conduit beginning to violently vibrate. Above ground, Kress would be seeing his stolen data dissolve into static. She smiled grimly as she plunged into a side tunnel. The trap was set now. She just had to evade the hunter. Chapter 6. Firewall and Flank. Sloane was moving fast when the seismic disruptor detonated. It wasn't a physical blast, but a sharp, localized spike in electromagnetic interference that shook the copper conduit like a tuning fork. She felt it through the soles of her boots, the vibration of millions of packets of data being violently scrambled. She knew what that meant above ground: utter chaos in the biometrics division. Kress's system was likely freezing, his precious collection of Lycan-Shell biometric data, harvested over years, being corrupted into useless noise. Digital victory achieved, but victory was immediately tempered by surveillance. She found a decommissioned monitoring station nestled in a side vent, and using her emergency override key, she pulled the local communication feed, monitoring Kress's unsecured private channel. Kress's voice, usually cold and measured, was now a snarling, desperate wreck. Gone. It's all gone. The alpha markers are static. The phase lock code is corrupted. She's alive. Find her, damn you. Use the drones, seal the egress points. A subordinate spoke, his voice clipped with fear. Sir, the core temperature is spiking. We are nearing operational red line. Should we initiate the full environmental lockdown? Kress spat back. No, too slow. The failsafe. Activate the final protocol. Manual trigger. I don't care about the drilling data. Just vaporize the site. Implode the shaft. Do it now. Sloane froze. The final protocol. It wasn't a lockdown, it was a remote, catastrophic seismic charge hidden deep within the bedrock, designed to seal the shaft permanently by collapsing miles of tunnel structure, guaranteeing a complete loss of all assets, including her body and the shiftcaster wreckage. The countdown was already running. She checked the structural analysis on her pad. Kress had set a maximum window of 10 minutes before the shaft became structurally unviable, crushing everything inside. The trap had just gotten infinitely larger. Kress wasn't just trying to collect her data. He was ready to wipe out a billion-dollar drill site to cover his tracks and ensure her total, irreversible termination. Sloane's fear morphed into a cold, lethal focus. She had 10 minutes to destroy the physical prototype she had fought so hard to protect, or Kress would trigger the largest mining disaster in GaeaCore's history, and she would be at the epicenter. She scrambled out of the vent. The tremors were no longer residual. They were growing, deep and bass-heavy, the sound of mountain bedrock being prepared for a final, violent goodbye. She had to get back to the prototype, and this time, there would be no restraint. Chapter 7. The Implosion Climax. The environment had turned predatory. The seismic tremors were now continuous, high-frequency detonations designed to shear bedrock. The massive, cylindrical elevator shaft was groaning, metal ripping like paper. Sloane could hear the sharp, sickening crack of tectonic plates shifting miles above her. She sprinted through the maintenance tunnels, guided by the instinctual, internal mapping of the light. She reached the prototype chamber just as a section of the drill head, weakened by the previous collapse, a massive sheet of steel a meter from her head. She saw the shiftcaster prototype still humming, still attempting to broadcast Kress's corrupted data, and realized there was no time for finesse. The tremors intensified. The chamber's structure was failing. If she attempted a controlled demolition, the collapse would guarantee her burial. She had to use her ultimate weapon, regardless of the cost to her mind. Sloane didn't fight the shift this time. She surrendered to the cold, dark power. She initiated the transformation with a feral, cleansing roar. It wasn't the pain that consumed her, but the sheer, focused strength that surged into her. Bone reinforced, muscles coiled, and the thick, black basalt fur erupted, hardening into a biological suit capable of withstanding hundreds of tons of pressure. The Lycan-Shell was deployed at maximum capacity. The Lycan-Shell's instincts took over. Destroy the contamination. It didn't use a tool. It didn't use a calculation. With a single, earth-shaking lunge, the shell closed the distance. Its claws now hardened like obsidian blades, ripping into the shiftcaster's chassis. Electrical arcs exploded from the damaged machine, but the Lycan-Shell ignored the pain, tearing through the complex array of fluid regulators and viral collectors. It worked with a destructive precision, seeking out the core stabilization systems that held the harvested life. A final, crushing claw strike vaporized the stabilizing unit. The Lycan agent, deprived of its containment field, destabilized instantly. A brief cold plume of mist escaped the wreck, a silent final confirmation. The weapon was neutralized. But the implosion was already irreversible. The ceiling above the chamber began to shred, and a torrent of superheated sludge and pulverized rock poured in. The sound was deafening, the pressure suffocating. Kress's plan was succeeding even. Without the prototype, the shaft was now her tomb. The Lycan-Shell didn't panic. With no clear escape route, it spotted a narrow, rusted geological access tube, long decommissioned and rated for less than a tenth of the current pressure. It was an impossible exit. With a final, desperate surge of will, Sloane forced the Lycan-Shell to its task. It braced against the floor, its muscles screaming with effort, and punched through the failing access hatch. As the main shaft collapsed into a thunderous cascade of rock and fire, the Lycan-Shell battered, burned, and moving on pure, raw instinct, squeezed into the pipe. The darkness consumed her. Chapter 8. Ghost in the System. The darkness was absolute, wet, and confining. Sloane was trapped in the decommissioned access pipe. Miles of solid earth and rock vibrating from the controlled destruction Kress had unleashed. The Lycan-Shell had saved her, but the pipe was too narrow for the beast to sustain itself. The process of reversion was the most agonizing part of all. The sound of bone grinding back into human shape, the basalt fur dissolving into a scorching, painful sweat. When she finally crashed out of the pipes, terminus a hidden drain valve near the shoreline. Miles from the main drill site, she was human, raw, trembling and naked, but undeniably human. The smell of salt, ozone, and clean air was a violent contrast to the sulfur and rock dust she'd inhabited. Her training kicked in. Survival was paramount. She located the nearest emergency supply, cache pre-positioned decades ago for a deep-sea cable crew, and retrieved a thermal blanket, a rudimentary comms unit, and a powerful, satellite-linked encryption key. Her final act against GaeaCore had to be silent and untraceable. Sloane knelt on the cold black sand, the rising sun painting the scene in cold orange light. Using the encrypted channel, she injected a virus payload into GaeaCore's server cloud. This wasn't the chaotic seismic disruptor from Chapter 5. This was surgery. She used her old administrator credentials to execute a clean, deep level command. Delete Sloane Keller asset, deep drill operative. Every file, her personnel jacket, her biometric records, her financial transfers, even the maintenance logs of the drill suit, vanished into the void. To GaeaCore, Sloane Keller had died in the shaft implosion, confirmed by the seismic anomaly Kress had triggered. She simultaneously initiated a final, brilliant countermove. She fabricated a ghost geological report, blaming the entire disaster not on human error, but on an unprecedented geothermal event, a sudden, unpreventable crust shift beneath the drill head. GaeaCore's public narrative was now set, a natural disaster. No negligence, and certainly no mention of a werewolf operative or a bioweapon. Standing up, Sloane looked back toward the horizon where the drill site lay buried beneath the ocean floor. She was now a ghost, with no digital footprint, no company to report to, and no one tracking the ebb and flow of her physiological state. The Lycan-Shell was no longer a corporate tool, a controlled asset with a quarterly performance review. It was hers, a weapon of absolute autonomy, forever a part of her, forever under her iron will. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She had millions in offshore accounts from her years of silent work, but the true prize was the silence itself. She turned her back on the ocean and walked inland, a lethal shadow free to choose her next move, ready to deploy the Lycan-Shell on her own terms, against anyone who dared to threaten her freedom again. The hunt, she knew, had just begun.